You're listening to The Jewish Truth Bomb with Lenny Goldberg.
Hey, this is Lenny Goldberg, and thank you for joining me today. The beautiful thing about the Torah is that it's not wishy-washy, it's not politically correct, it doesn't try to find favor, and it's tachlis, and it gives answers. And the mitzvah, the commandment, to drive out the inhabitants of the land is repeated again and again in the Torah in all kinds of different ways. And in the parsha we read this past Shabbat, it's written as plain as day. It says towards the end of the book of Numbers, V'horashtem et yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, and you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land, because to you I gave the land to inherit. And a couple verses later it says, and if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land, those that you leave there will be thorns in your eyes and thistles in your sides, and they will give you trouble on the land which you dwell. Now you can't get any clearer than that. Maybe it's not nice. Maybe it sounds like ethnic cleansing, but that's what it says. And the reason why Rabbi Meir Kahane was so consistent, that he said the same thing since the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, he never changed. He spoke of the need to move out the Arabs from the land of Israel. Why? Because it's written in the Torah, clear as day, black and white. Now you can come up with the same conclusion, just from logic. If you have a little common sense, you know that two nations can't occupy the same space, right? It's a law of physics. Or if you know history, or you know what's going on in Northern Ireland, or if you know some World War II history when, after that war, the Czechs and the Poles expelled 12 million ethnic Germans from their country because they were for Hitler a fifth column. And Rabbi Meir Kahane wrote a book called They Must Go on this subject. And in Hebrew, the book was entitled Sikim Be'enechem, Thorns in Your Eyes. That's the verse in our Parsha. Thorns in your eyes. So that's the Torah imperative. The Torah understands the danger of leaving the inhabitants of the land inside Israel, that they will eventually rise up, rebel, and they're going to be thorns in your eyes. The Torah, in its divine wisdom, knows what's best. It understands that if we try to live together with these people, we're going to kill them. They're going to kill us. We're going to have to beat them and occupy them, so to speak. So the Torah says, drive them out of the land, and that will be the best for everybody, for them and for you. In the end, that's the humanitarian answer, to drive them out and separate. Now, when you look at the commentaries, it's unbelievable how accurate the commentators are. That is, even without any commentary, the verse is clear. You have to drive out the inhabitants of the land. If not, there'll be thorns in your eyes. But when you look at Rashi and the Sforno and the Orach Chaim and all the holy commentators, when they chime in on the verses, they clarify it even more sharply. What do they say? What does it mean by the verse that there'll be thorns in your eyes and thickets in your sides? And then it says, V'tzareru etchem ala aretz asher atem yoshvim ba, and they will give you tsuris, they will trouble you in the land in which you dwell. What do they have to say in the land in which you dwell? It sounds kind of redundant. They'll trouble you. What do you mean they'll trouble you on the land in which you dwell? So they say like this, that even when you conquer parts of the land of Israel, and you'll dwell in it, you'll have your settlements, you'll have your nice yeshuvim, but in the parts you did not conquer, those parts, they're going to rise up and they won't leave you alone. They will constantly make your life miserable, even in the places you conquered. So even in the places that you were able to conquer, you won't have peace and quiet because you did not drive out the inhabitants in those other places. And all the commentators say that. They all say the same thing in their own way. And that's why at the end of the verse, where it says to drive out the inhabitants of the land, it says, Ki lechem natati et haaretz lereshetota, that I gave you this land. Why? Lereshetota. I gave it to you to conquer, not to dwell. It doesn't say natati et haaretz leshevet ba, to dwell in it or to settle in it. No, not to settle in it, but to conquer it, to inherit it. Lereshetota. That's the mitzvah, to conquer it. So imagine that. The mitzvah really isn't Yeshuv Haaretz. We hear all the time, Yeshuv Haaretz, settle the land. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to drive out the inhabitants of the land. That's the mitzvah. And if you drive them out, then you can settle in it. It'll be normal for you. They won't throw rocks at your cars and Molotov cocktails. You'll be able to have a normal life where you don't have to worry about getting shot at by the inhabitants of the land that you didn't drive out. And so in a way, we did this whole settlement enterprise in reverse. The settlement movement came along after the 67 war when we conquered the lands in Judea and Samaria. And we built settlements on hilltops, but we did it amongst a mountain of Arabs. We got these hilltops. Our hilltops are surrounded by mountains of inhabitants of the land that we didn't expel. So at the beginning it worked, because after the 6 Day War, the Arabs basically sat quietly. They were humbled, they were defeated. But as time passed, they slowly became thorns in our eyes, like the Torah says. And all those years that Rabbi Kahana warned about this, he was condemned by everybody. Religious Jews, non-religious Jews, Orthodox Jews. That's racist. That's ethnic cleansing. How can you say such a thing? Because you see, when you talk about that, that's the ugly side of Yeshuv Haaretz. We like the pretty side of settling the land. You know, setting up settlements, Alinu Arza, Chalutzim, like the Kibbutznikim. That's consensus. But to drive out the inhabitants of the land, that's not for us. That's ugly. And we know that in Judaism, you have to be nice. Anyway, this isn't just some technicality. This is a major theme in the Tanakh. If you look at the book of Judges, in the second chapter, or the end of the first chapter, there's a list of tribes who did not drive out the inhabitants of the land. And the whole complex situation we ended up with in the book of Judges, the whole mud that we were stuck in the book of Judges, is for one reason. And it says this clearly at the end of chapter 1 of the book of Judges, because we did not drive out the inhabitants of the land. And therefore they were thorns in our eyes and thickets in our sides. Because Joshua, when he conquered the land, unfortunately, didn't really finish the job. And that became a snare to us. And these are all verses explicit in the book of Judges and in other places. And so it's happened once again as we entered the land. We made settlements, but we ignored, or we never aspired for more than that. Now, I'm not against having settlements, for sure. Set up the settlements, establish settlements. But your aspiration, your ambition, at the end of the day, is to drive out the inhabitants of the land in any way you can. And that means not having them build your houses and not employing them and giving them a foothold in the land and parnasa and livelihood. That's just another reason why it's imperative to have avodah ivrit, Jewish labor. And it looks like Jews are starting to understand this after October 7th, at least. You see a lot more Jews being hired in places where Arabs used to be hired. But on the other hand, slowly, I see everything going back to normal. And little by little, the feeling just fades away and we forget what happened. And we return to our routine. And just to show you how everything just fades, I know leftists who, after October 7th, they said, no more. I've been wrong. We can't trust the Arabs anymore. We can't make deals with them, etc. Well, a lot of time has passed, right? 10 months. So when I speak to them now, they're back to their old views. They forgot about it, or it just kind of fades from their memory. Anyway, speaking of destroying evil, as you must know, last week, Israel assassinated the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in the Iranian capital of Tehran, and Jews rejoiced, and our enemies, of course, condemned it. And I want to talk about one particular Arab leader who condemned it, Abu Mazen, also known as Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. And even though he condemned it publicly, of course, the fact is, he loves it. Because I'm going to explain to you why Abu Mazen isn't shedding any tears about it. The opposite, he's handing out baklava. Why is that? Well, I want to explain why, because it's important to understand your enemy. You have to know what's going on amongst the Arabs themselves. You have to know how your enemy works. What's his mindset? So let me just recall some history. You see, after the pullout from Gaza, the Natkut in 2006, well, now that the Jews are out of there and the IDF pulled out, they had elections in Gaza. And Abu Mazen had replaced Arafat as head of the PLO. And he was sure that he was going to win hands down. In elections between the PLO and the Hamas, Abu Mazen figured it was a sure thing. What happened, though? Well, he got a slap in the face. By who? You got it. Ismail Haniyeh. You see, Haniyeh, he represented the Hamas, and they received 74 seats in the elections in Gaza, and Mazen, who represented the PLO, got only 45 seats. He got destroyed in the elections. And so what happened then, and you can look this all up, that the entire Arab world, they were trying to make peace between Abu Mazen and Ismail Hania. They went to Mecca and they made an agreement and they hugged and they kissed. But that was only on the outside. Listen to what happened when they returned to the Gaza Strip. This Ismail Hania, who he just assassinated, what did he do? He sent his murderers, his Hamas murderers, to murder the murderers of Abu Mazen. You get that? The Hamas murderers murdered the PLO murderers. They took the PLO leaders, they threw them off the roofs. You might remember this. It was on the news in 2006. And they chased the PLO out of Gaza. They totally humiliated the PLO soldiers of Abu Mazen. Ashraf, Fatah, the PLO, they left Gaza with their tails between their legs. And ever since then, it's the Hamas that controls Gaza. The Hamas was voted in by a huge majority. And that's why, by the way, that all the innocent citizens of Gaza, they're not innocent. They voted Hamas. But that's not the point here. The point I'm trying to make is about the Arab mentality. You think Abu Mazen forgot what Hania did to him? You think he forgot how he and his PLO were degraded by the Hamas back then? Believe me, Abu Mazen wasn't crying. He was overjoyed. He was handing out the baklawa left and right. There is no difference between Abu Mazen, also known as Mahmoud Abbas. There's no difference between him and Ismail Hania. It's Abu Mazen who finances and compensates terrorists and encourages them to murder Jews. And so you don't have to go as far as Tehran to start eliminating these scum. There are plenty right here under our nose in Israel who are no less dangerous. And all this infighting amongst the Arabs, with Abbas and Hania, they all try to kill each other. That's par for the course for Yishmael. And by the way, his name is Yishmael Hania. Yishmael. The Arabs are descended from the biblical Yishmael. And what does it say about Yishmael in the Torah? It says he will be a Pera Adam, a wild man. Hayad Bakol v'yad kolbo. His hand against everyone and everyone against him. His hand against everyone and everyone against him. They kill each other, as they do in Lebanon and everywhere else. And how this verse encapsulates what Yishmael is. A Pera Adam, it says, a wild man. Now, what's amazing about this term is, Hebrew's not like English. In Hebrew, first you have the noun and then the adjective. It's not like English where you have the adjective and then the noun. Like in English, you say, good boy. He's a good boy. Good boy. Good is the adjective, boy's the noun. But in Hebrew, you say, Yeled Tov. First you give the noun, then the adjective. But the term used here is Pera Adam, wild man. Pera is wild, Adam is man. What does that mean? That Pera, wild, that's the noun. Adam, man, is the adjective. So he's a Pera. That's what he is. That's his essence. That's the noun. And Adam, that's secondary. That's the adjective. Now, since the elimination of Hania in Tehran, everyone in Israel is sitting here nervous. What's going to happen next? There's got to be a response, right? Nobody knows where it's going to come from, how it's going to come. Everybody's tied up in knots because you figure Iran has to respond to save face. If Israel had killed this guy in Qatar, which they could have, it would not have been such an affront to Iran. But once you do it, on their home turf, then they have to respond. So it's okay that they killed him in Tehran, but don't stop now and just wait to get hit. Because that's what we're doing now. We're preparing to get hit. Because everything we do is tit for tat. You hit me, we hit you. You murdered 12 innocent children, so we're going to hit you back. Now we're going to wait. Now it's your turn to hit us. And I want to play for you now what Jonathan Pollard says about this. He's interviewed here by Rabbi David Bar Chaim from Machon Shiloh. And he describes this problem of Israel going tit for tat. And then, as Pollard always does, he explains what we have to do to win this thing. So take a listen.
The problem with Israel, I'll focus in on the high command and the government for that matter, is that neither has been able to understand, let alone implement, a policy or a doctrine of warfare that involves sustained attacks on an enemy until they are defeated. I'm talking about actions such as killing Shukr in Beirut and killing Hania in Iran are sure to elicit some very strong reactions from both Hezbollah and from the Iranians and their proxies, perhaps the Houthis and others. It's like sucker punching somebody much bigger, getting the drop on somebody much bigger than you. knocking him to the ground, knocking him senseless, and then letting him kind of shake the fog from his head and get up and say, okay, now I'm going to hit you back. Nobody that I've talked to, both within or without the army, understands why we didn't, for example, we didn't hit the funeral for Hania in Tehran. Everybody who was anybody of importance was there at the funeral. Lastly, with Shukra in Beirut, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Radwan forces who I saw on video being rehearsed for the funeral. I mean, that would be a massive strike on our part to take out perhaps over 1,000 enemy special forces in one go. And who knows who else attending that funeral. So the question at that point is, why aren't we targeting these funerals? They obviously, both the Hezbollah as well as the Iranians, know we won't. And so precisely for that reason, we should take them by surprise, so to speak. And the second reason is, why are we waiting? Why is this country in turning itself into knots, waiting for what? We don't know. We have violated one of the most sacred principles of military doctrine, which is never allow the enemy to seize the initiative. You have to hit them and to continue to hit them as hard as you possibly can until they do not rise again.
That was Jonathan Pollard, the smartest guy in the room. And if Israel was a normal country, a country that wants to win, that man would be the defense minister. And so in the meantime, we hold our breaths, waiting for retaliation from Iran and her proxies. Technically, they can send rockets from 5 directions simultaneously. Now, if Israel does what Pollard says, a sustained attack, and not a tit for tat, if that happens, and that's what Israel should do, well, you can expect an escalation in anti-Semitism worldwide. After all, they're saying that Israel is committing genocide now, and we don't even do anything. Imagine if we really dropped the genocide on them. And so what I mean is, either way, it bodes bad for the Jews in the exile. Maybe our enemies will reach the conclusion that Israel means business, and that it might be safer to hit soft Jewish targets in the exile. That would be easy pickings, hitting targets in the exile. And let's not even mention the Jew-hating Democratic Party and their Jew-hating agenda. And even if Trump wins, then if you thought the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020 was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. You're going to see anti-Semitic protests that will be financed by Iran and George Soros, etc. And so either way, American Jews can be expected to be attacked and bashed in the streets and in the synagogues, God forbid. And when and if it gets bad, who knows if the Jews will have a place to escape safely to? We might see sanctions imposed on Israel. That'll cost canceled flights. There's going to be wars that are going on. It's not going to be easy to fly out. And so if you say, well, Israel's also dangerous, look what happened on Simchas Torah. But at least in Israel, there's a divine promise that there won't be a destruction of the Third Commonwealth. There is no such guarantee in the exile for the Jew. The contrary, the exile eventually is going to be phased out. And so what's happening is that Israel and the Jews are becoming more and more isolated, even if it's per force. Israel will be forced to become self-sufficient and to place her faith in God. She's got no choice because she's going to be cornered and she's going to have to take steps to protect herself against an increasingly hostile world. And the more Israel defends itself, Jews in the exile are going to be targeted more and more. And so it is definitely a good time to consider Aliyah now. If not for your sake, then for the sake of your children. It makes no sense to set down roots over there. You make the move, and then your children, they won't have to. That's it for me. Sorry to be a prophet of doom. You can hear happier things if you listen to my Bible classes, Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes. We learn about the wars of King David. Now there's somebody who tries to win. He's not kicking the can. We learn about all the Jewish heroes, Yonatan and Saul and Yoav ben Sruya. Those are the scholar warriors, the type of Jews who should be leading Am Yisrael. And it's only in the Bible where you learn what was a Jew before the exile messed him up. And so again, you can Google Lenny Goldberg's Bible classes, or you can check out my website, lennygoldberg.com, lennygoldberg.com. And there you can find the link to the Bible classes, to this podcast, and lots of books by Rabbi Meir Kahana and Binyamin Kahana for sale. And I'll be back next week, same time, same station.